Morning, everybody. Evening, everybody. Oh, people are showing up. Okay. The machine's behind. Hey, Martin. Hey, Gene. Hey, Chris. The machine can't tell if it's sending data or not. Obviously it is, so we're okay. Hey, Lorena and Mary in Nashville.
What could this be? Ah, it's a Limehouse Blue.
Okay, we're good, yeah. Hey, Paula. Hey, Maria. Hey, Rob. Hey, Priya. Betsy. Leah. Evening, Nancy and Jeanette. Robert over on YouTube. Hey, Ellen. Evening, Eric, Joanne, Susan, Alexandra, Marcia, Susie. Hey, Mary. Hey, Gregory. A lot of Nashville in the house tonight. Hey, Mary. And hey, Mike. Hey, Robert. Hey, Sheila. Hey, Bridget, Marie, Jenny, Jay, and Mona. Hey, Tracy on YouTube. Mary, Sarah, Katie, and Karen. Hey, Laura, Patty, Lisa. They're sending me messages like 4 at a time. Hope I'm catching them all. Hey, Georgie. Hey, Debbie. Hey, Kelly. Hey, Betsy. Yeah, I hope so. Hey, Rich. Hey, Sarah. Hey, Linda. Oh, hey, Magnolia. Hey, Christopher. Hey, Casey. Elizabeth, Paula, Mary. Jacqueline. Hey, Teresa, Robert, Renee, Donna, Rosemary. Hey, Kelly, Debbie, Dave, and Barb. Hey, Sean, Lynn, Laura. Look who's here. We have a pre-show appearance from Mr. Miles here. Hey, Marie, Jerry, Gail, Karen, Ellen. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Ann. Adam, yes it is. It is Thursday. T-minus 3 hours till the new Bleachers album comes out. Hey, Christy.
That's what you call a powerhouse coder. Yeah, Earl Baba Hines carries out.
Hey, Stephanie, Karen, Catherine. Evening, Ann. Hey, Betsy. Hey, Timothy. Hey, Sue. Well, Miles is now pushing his cat dancer toy around. Kelly, no, he does not have green eyes. Hey, Julia. Hey, Bridget. Hey, Joanne. Hey, Carol. Welcome back, Carol. Hey, Bob. Hey, Aviva. Hey, Nikki. Alright, closing mail, so if anybody's going to email and say, so it's 7 Eastern, what is that to me in it's 7 Central, what's that to me in Eastern time? Hey, Gina. Hey, Sherlock. Gene. Hey, no one on YouTube. Hey, Sherry in Seattle. And Miles just begs to play with the cat dancer. Anytime I come into the room, he's like pushing it towards me. Like, can we jump? Can we jump? Hey, Mama Red in Plano. Evening, Shirley and Marita. Hey, Dad. Dishing out ice cream. Okay. Hey, Lee. All this change in the weather and all the stuff is getting in my sinuses, so if I'm not careful, I talk like Skeletor. Hey, Jennifer. I'm drinking some few cold cut bourbon. Hey, Julie. Hey, Marie. Hey, Jenna. Hey, Marla and Skokie. Sheila, pass it on to Mandy. I was just doing admin for it, but admin for that tour was a doozy.
Give our faithful seat a slap and carry on in jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
Hey, Stephanie Miles is alright. He was just here. Hey, Anita. Hey, Robert. Yeah, I can do the voice. There's a...
Tell me about the loneliness of good. Is it equal to the loneliness of evil?
Joanne, sorry to hear that. Kathy, there's lots I can't do. Math, for one. Outside of basic arithmetic. Hey, Charles. I could do like the whole tour as Skeletor.
This is the Dews Mansion. I will take over the Dews Mansion and harness its power.
This does look like the kind of place he would take over. Hey, Teresa. Hey, Paul. Yeah, a friend of mine lived across the street from this mansion about 10 years ago, too.
As we're driving out west here, well, let's stop and have a little Father Hines melody of
Hey, Augustin.
sunset. Right.
Hey, Donna. Hey, Chris. Hey, Gary. Hey, Jan. Glad to have you. Maria, that's the word on the street. Hey, Deb. Hey, Rodney. I'm imagining Ricketts doing the Skeletor voice now, only for real. No one? Yeah, I can do Charlie Brown's. Womp, 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 womp. Evening, Beth.
Good night, this my very sweetheart. Good night. Many moons have passed since I've gone. I'll be back at crack of the dawn. Every blade of grass where I
Ooh, C. Martin Dorsey, that's rough.
whisper as I pass.
Glad to have you here, though. Hey, Linda. Hey, Cindy.
Hand in hand, we'll stand beneath the moon and bid the Colorado sunset good night.
Kathy, it wasn't nearly as bad as we were afraid. It was mostly just ghost hunters who thought they were getting a ghost hunt for reasons that are entirely on their own fault. And as nutty ghost hunters go, they were nowhere near that as bad as the nutty ones get. Hey, Sue. Hey, Diane. Hey, Molly.
Loud and Leroy Harris for the words. We turn on now to the next two. Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
Hey, Vivian. Thanks, Vivian. Hey, Karen. Hey, Kathy. All right, we'll give it a few more minutes. People tend to log on right about this time. Evening, Lindsay. Hey, Eileen. We can always count on Karen to tell us what sucks. Everybody loves to hate the Yankees. Oh man, Ron Popeil died too? Well, not for till probably the end of the month. Hey, Grandma Bell. Hey, Jackie and Irene. Thanks to Lador. Hey, Ryan. Alright, we'll let Earl Father Hines finish out a song or so. But it seems like right at 8 o'clock we get like a 10 or 20% jump, so we'll give it a minute. I'll toast anybody who inspired a Weird Al song, that's Mr. Popeil. Vivian, that is the plan, yeah. Yeah, Mandy and Layla are both, you know, outside of the boat tour, I can't really come up with events for everybody at once. So they're going to do some events too. Karita, I am just drinking straight bourbon. And on the side, some Trader Joe's brand LaCroix. Dave and Barb, 13. I'll let Earl finish off this song. Hey, Jordana, you made it, but you missed my Skeletor impression. So I'll do it again as I answer Julie's question. 503 West Wrightwood. All right. So that's a good stopping place for Earl Father Hines. I think it is. I got 8:03. I think it is time to get going here. So, all right. Welcome along, everybody. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tour. It is my sinuses making it very difficult for me not to lapse into a Skeletor voice tonight. It could be Steve Urkel, so that's even worse. But welcome along. I've been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for about 15 years now. I've got about a dozen Chicago history books out, some of which cover stuff that we'll be talking about tonight, including Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Flickering Empire, How Chicago Invented the U.S. Film Industry, and there's the overall book, The Smart Aleck's Guide to American History. Badly out of date, but somehow still in print after after a dozen years. I'm also on TV all the time. I'm on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, the Smithsonian Channel. So all in all, I am, in fact, incredibly famous. You should definitely pay attention to whatever I say. And also join my Patreon if you have the time. So, all right, today we're going to be doing a tour of Lakeview and Lincoln Park. These are a couple of neighborhoods that are their names are kind of used interchangeably for a lot of areas. This is the area just above the Gold Coast area. Once you get above about North Avenue, stretching all the way up to about Irving Park, between about roughly Ashland and the lake. Some people would extend it farther over to Damon or even all the way over to Western. Basically, it's just mid-north side of the area around Wrigley Field. Now, there's lots of great stuff all over the neighborhood. It's a big enough area that I can't really do a walking tour of it, but we can do it all virtually. Just above that is Uptown. If I have time, I'm going to do an Uptown tour next week. But we're going to start with one that actually I did used to use as a stop on the occasional bus tour. Right down here we are on Halsted Street, 2400 block of Halsted, well, 2401 block. We're coming up on this building here that, up until very recently, was known as the Tonic Room, currently known as the Golden Dagger. It just reopened under that name. We'll move it back to how it looked before. The Tonic Room, well, back in the day, this was a building that was called the Everly Club. Not the same as the Everly Club that was the most fancy brothel in all of Chicago, but that's what they named it after. It was known like that for a nightclub for a while, reputed to have been a North Side mob hangout in the 20s and 30s. which may or may not be true, of course, but hey, everything else was a Northside Mob hangout, why shouldn't this be too? And one of the main things they have to back that up is that a number of employees there years back told me they had seen the ghost of a guy who looked like he was dressed for the 1930s. He had the hat, he had the suspenders, and he would kind of wander around, walk up to the bar, and then just kind of disappear. But where it gets weird is in the 1970, this was the site of an occult bookshop. It was profiled in the Chicago Tribune article called Witch Hunt. A reporter goes out to find a witch and comes up with a handsome young woman who would be lost without a Xerox machine. And for 1970 treatment of neo-paganism, this is actually a pretty good article. But while this place was operating as an adult bookstore, as a cult bookstore, not adult bookstore, an occult bookstore, there was also a group meeting in the basement. It was, a cult might not be the actual word, it might just be, it's kind of a new age group. No, it's generally referred to in the press when they talk about this as being the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which is kind of a mixture of ancient Egyptian, ancient Babylonian stuff, and just some pure fiction. I remember from my research of it years ago, it was actually a group that was known as the Sabians. And down in the basement, they do have things like pentagrams and ancient Egyptian motifs painted all around the walls and the ceiling and the floor. And while they were digging in the basement early on, they found this Skeletor-headed dagger. Now, this was old enough that it probably wouldn't have actually been Skeletor. It was this weird skull face. The blade itself, I could never get a good shot of the blade, but it's about yay long, rusted all to hell. It was probably buried after some sort of ritual, probably smeared in blood or various other bodily fluids. Exactly what it could have been for, we can really only speculate. But it was kind of a weird thing to dig up. And they've still got it. They, in fact, recently just renamed the place the Golden Dagger. It's also now a coffee shop in the morning. Looked really good when I walked by filming it. And they now have the dagger framed. It is up on the wall. There are those who say that when they took the dagger out of the basement floor or the wall, they always told me it was the basement. Newer articles tend to say that it was the wall. They say that when they removed the dagger from its resting place, the spirits were unleashed. Which, I wish that was the way that it actually worked. It would make my job as a ghost tour guide an awful lot easier. But let's spin just up the road for this if you like ghost stories. We'll kind of zip. It was over there on the left. Now we're spinning around to the corner of Halstead and Lil right up here, for a really wild ghost story that's kind of forgotten now from the 1890s, 1894, but possibly stretching back into the 1880s. It was said around the neighborhood that construction workers didn't like this building and said only a very brave man would go inside of the place, particularly up to the garret. Now, this isn't the building that was there in 1894. In 1894, there was a rickety old frame building occupied by a broom maker named Chris Heim. And Chris Heim reported that the place was absolutely haunted. And in fact, neighbors pointed this out as well. Apparently they had been for some time. The story was that back in 1880, it was occupied by a German family, a man, 2 children, and the man's brother. But one day, all of them except for the brother were killed. The brother disappeared. The bodies were all found bleeding on the first floor, with a trail of blood indicating that they had been killed way up on the garret. Thereafter, it was said that the garret was especially haunted, and Chris Heim would wager anybody $5 that they couldn't spend an entire night up in the garret. And naturally, a few people tried to take him up on this deal, and they reported things like that when they tried to spend the night up there, but in the middle of the night they fell asleep and woke up to see a woman in white with eyes as big as saucers, standing over them and holding out a handful of burning sulfur, asking them to take a bite. It's a really good story, honestly. Great visual. Usually, now as a researcher, when people tell me it's a woman in white, I immediately think they're just telling me what they think I want to hear. That was probably just as true in 1894 as it is now. But the stories predated Chris Heim. My first guess would have been that it was just something he cooked up so he could keep winning $5 bets, maybe had somebody dressing up like that, but it would be some pretty good special effects. Plus, you're left with a garret that smells like sulfur, so it's really not that good of a bargain. It's still one of my favorite forgotten ghost stories, just a lurid image of holding out a handful of burning sulfur. Oh, sorry, I'm doing Skeletor. Holding out a handful of burning sulfur! Alright, well, let's move around through Lakeview a little bit further. Well, first of all, we're just going to stop where I got my most recent bourbon purchase. This Benny's that looks like a castle, formerly the Ivanhoe Theater. Now, in the 1970s, Tom Waits performed here. It is a scientific fact that booze purchased from a place where Tom Waits performed in the 1970s tastes better than the same bottle of booze if you bought it someplace else. That's a fact. Trust the science. But we'll just look at that briefly before we move across the street to a building we featured once on the mini tour, but I had to kind of refresh my memory about the story. Well, first, there's the bookshop over here, Books Rare, Medium, and Well Done, which is an experience unto itself. But then right here is this building at 2958 North Clark. Now, if you were walking down the street and somebody would told me that building used to be a brothel, I'd be like, yeah, right. It's one of those things they say about a lot of different buildings. In this case, it's actually fairly well documented. 1931. There was a woman named Helen Deal who lived in Fort Wayne. That apparently was not her real name. She wouldn't tell the press what her real name was. When asked, she would say, oh, don't ask me things like my real name or who my parents are. But in Fort Wayne, she was out partying with a couple of guys one night in 1931, and they told her, you should move to Chicago. We know a guy, we can get you a job in the big city. We'll really set you up. And she said, okay. They took her up there to an apartment that was a little bit further south of here, down in Old Town, and introduced her to a guy named Colantino, who was now her pimp. He set her up in what was known as a massage parlor over in this building at 2958 Clark, where she worked for a couple of weeks. Newspapers were kind of vague about what she did. She would just say, oh, you know what I had to do. Then, meanwhile, she was still living in Colantino's apartment. Now, initially, the press reported that she ended up shooting Colantino because she thought he was her boyfriend and found that he had other women. The way that she told the story was a little different. She'd been working for him for 2 weeks, and one day she noticed that he had a pistol in his room, so she ran and grabbed it. She said, I'm going to kill myself, but first I think I'm going to kill you. And he simply laughed and said, oh yeah? You're going to shoot me? I dare ya. Go ahead. Wrong thing to say. Because she did exactly that. She shot him in the neck, then turned the gun on herself and hit herself in the shoulder. Now, she was taken to the police station and said, I'm glad I didn't succeed in killing myself. Maybe life still holds a bit of pleasure for me. Now, this busted up a whole ring that Colantino and his friends were working on things like this. Initially, the state's attorney really wanted to try Helen Deal for murder, but the coroner's jury very quickly determined that she had actually acted in self-defense. The state's attorney was furious about that, but she was free to go. And from here, I'm going to move on to the rabbit hole of the day. Over here, not too far away, down at 503 Wrightwood, is this absolutely fantastic, phantasmagoric mansion. It is known as the Dews Mansion. 1893, the brewer Francis Dews came to Chicago, visited the World's Fair, liked it so much he said, I want a house that's like one of these buildings. So 1896, this place was built for him. It was designed by Kudel and Herx, a couple of architects who also did Cyrus McCormick's mansion here in Chicago. Now, he lived in it until his death in 1921 and just made it as gaudy as humanly possible. He had a muralist who was employed for 2 solid years just painting murals on everything. And so we refer to it as a Beaux-Arts style architecture, though sometimes it's called Second Empire. Really what it is just a mishmash of everything that Francis J. Dews thought might be cool. And it's kind of a messy composition on the inside, but that's part of its charm, really. So he owned it until his death in 1921. At the time of his death in 1921, it was bought by the Swedish Engineers Club, which at the time had as many as 500 members. They owned it for the next 50 years. But by the 1970s, they were down to only a small handful of members, and most of them were too old to really get much use out of the house, so they decided it was time to put it up for sale. It was not yet a landmark. They stipulated in the sale that they really hoped to find that there would be a buyer who could maintain the integrity of the place and preserve the place properly. But they also said that if we can't find one, we'll probably have to sell to a developer. A developer would have torn the place down and put up a high-rise here or something. And it looked as though they were going to have to tear it down and sell it to a developer. But then, a 26-year-old kid named George Santo Pietro came in, looked around and said, I love it, I'm gonna buy it. He paid the full asking price of $300,000 and promised that he would maintain the integrity completely. So, this guy, let's look at a quick couple other looks at this place. There's a full look of it. I'll just keep it on this one, because I love the way this looks with the statues and all of the ornamentation. But George Santo Pietro was in the process of starting his own magazine called Coke, C-O-Q, French for chick, knowing full well that most people would not pronounce it like Coke. This was supposed to be a rival for Playboy. He kind of saw himself, I think, as a rival for Hugh Hefner, and decided that, you know, Playboy had a mansion, I need a mansion too. 26 years old. The press was kind of fascinated by this guy. One of them, they mentioned, he said at first that he wanted Playboy to be a little more working class. You know, Playboy says if you have all this money and you get yourself the right sports car, you'll be able to make love to X number of women per week. We're going to be more realistic than that. But he did buy a mansion and said, well, hell, mansions are all right. I can understand wanting to live in a mansion. Hey, don't quote me as saying hell. My mother would get upset. It noted in the press that Santo Pietro tooled around the car in an Excalibur, a cream-colored Excalibur, with his girlfriend Susan, an ex-Playboy bunny, who eventually became the executive director of Coke. Now, together they were also very into sushi. That made the news at the time. That's kind of an unusual thing to be into in 73. So the press said, if Santo Pietro's dream comes true, it could make an interesting process, a reconditioning process for the American male. Identifying with Hugh Hefner, his bunnies and sports cars was no problem, but are we ready for raw fish? Might be a good thing worth investing in. So, Coke, the magazine, only lasted for about 4 issues. And thereafter, near as I can tell, George Santo Pietro disappeared from the news until 1990, when a guy by that same name was romantically linked to Vanna White from Wheel of Fortune. Now, at the time, it was hard for me to tell whether this was actually the same Santo Pietro, but at the time she was first linked to him, Irv Kupacet in the Chicago Sun-Times put out a column saying, we don't want to get Vanna's vowels in an uproar, but does she know the real Pietro? He's well known in Chicago as an alleged con artist with his own Wheel of Fortune. Among his many local scams, Pietro bilked the wife of a millionaire out of $125,000 and also tried to dupe a Chicago hotel out of a huge sum, but made restitution after he was sieged. During that period, Santos, who also used the name Jonas Peters, tooled around town in a white Excalibur. He was also by this time known as a restaurateur who ran a sushi restaurant. Now, they divorced in 2012, and most articles about George Santo Pietro, Vanna's ex, also say that he's the same George Santo Pietro who still to this day works as a dolly grip and cameraman on a number of TV shows. Many of them say that that's how he really broke into Hollywood in the early 1980s, working as a dolly grip. He's listed as a dolly grip on shows like The Mandalorian and The Good Place. Now, they also say that his life before about 1980 seems to be a mystery, or not much is really known. In this case, though, it looks like we found out what he was up to before 1980. He was back here in Chicago as a 26-year-old man trying to become Hugh Hefner and get his own magazine off the ground. Now, this is still a little bit of a mystery. I couldn't find an absolute smoking gun. I tried calling a phone number that came up for him and got no answer. I posted all of this on Twitter trying to figure out if he's the same George Santo Pietro who is now a dolly grip on The Mandalorian, the same one who is married to Vanna White, and the one who owned this mansion. My guess is he is the one who married Vanna White, but maybe not the guy who works behind the scenes on TV shows. I was really honestly hoping that Vanna herself would reach out and solve the puzzle. It's only so often Vanna gets to say, I'd like to solve the puzzle. But after he had moved out of this place in the 1970s, the late 1970s and early 80s, it was jointly owned by a ward committeeman and a guy who was the drummer in the band Chicago. They jointly owned it for a while. Last anyone knew, it was owned by a property management company. It was on the market for about $10 million a few years back, but they couldn't find a buyer. Now it's just kind of sitting there. I've heard of it being rented out as an event space now and then. It appears in a couple of movies. It was used as the rectory in the Father Dowling TV series. And in the film Gaily Gaily, it was used as the Everleigh Club. So this is actually two Northside places that are not the real Everleigh Club. So this is at Wrightwood and Pine Grove. From here, we are going to spin around. One thing I'll say, the George Santo Pietros, of the three of them, they all seem to be the same age. We'll move up a little bit further on Pine Grove here. But this, let me move this one up a little bit. Here at 2740 Pine Grove, back in 1977, the fire department got a call about an apartment being on fire. They came to the apartment and found a woman dead. Young woman named Teresita Basa, a Filipino woman who was working as a respiratory technician at Edgewater Hospital, was found stabbed to death in her burning apartment. They were completely stumped. They had a couple of clues, but nothing that really led anywhere, until a couple of months later when one of the detectives got a call from a guy in Skokie and said, "I may have some information for you. Can you come to my house and we'll talk about it?" Now, apparently, this guy's wife, Remy, had been going into trances and speaking in Teresita Basa's voice. She named the killer as a guy named Alan Showery, gave the motive as stealing some of Teresita's jewelry. Now, Alan Showery was initially brought in for questioning, just kind of by the by. They didn't really put much stock in this. But it turned out that his own story about where he had been that night fell apart very quickly, and after a while he confessed he was in fact the killer, and it had in fact been for the jewelry. So this got to be quite the story. Possessed spirit named murder suspect, court told. Teresita herself was taken back to the Philippines to be buried. Now, this nearly ended in a mistrial, but then Alan Showery changed his plea to guilty at the last minute, ended up going to jail for this, and it ended up inspiring a book called A Voice from the Grave. Now, when people retell the story, they tend to exaggerate a little bit. You tend to hear that Mrs. Schwa was speaking in a language that she didn't understand. She worked in the same hospital as Teresita, but had never met her, and was saying things that she couldn't have possibly known. Now, this is sometimes held up as proof of demonic possession. It is held up as proof of the paranormal, proof of psychics, proof of whatever somebody wants to believe on a given day. Really, under further scrutiny, it's not quite that clear. She knew Teresita better than she's usually said to. She had been at parties at her house. Sometimes their shifts overlapped at the hospital. The voice episode didn't come until several months after the fact. So the more likely scenario is that she found out about the murder, and for some reason, the only way she felt comfortable was either coming up with this ruse of a voice from the grave, or possibly having a kind of a psychological episode. But the couple, the Schwas, spoke about it once in an interview in 1980. They didn't give more interviews when it was on Unsolved Mysteries a decade later. As near as I can tell, they never spoke about it again. Jose Schwa, the husband, died about 20 years ago. I believe Remy is actually still alive, but she does not talk about this sort of thing. But it all started right here in this apartment. There's quite a bit on Pine Grove. In fact, from the Brewster Apartments, we can start here, move the camera over. And this is called the Brewster Apartments, just a little bit further north. It's really more of an architectural relic than anything else. It's a really fantastic building with an 8-story atrium on the inside. The developer who was building it fell through fell through it and died, which has led to stories of it being haunted. Just about every article you read about it says that Charlie Chaplin lived on the penthouse. He absolutely did not live on the penthouse. Charlie Chaplin was only in Chicago for a few weeks and was way, way, way too frugal to get himself a place like this. I believe he just crashed on Bronco Billy's couch the whole time. But there have been stories about it being haunted. Also, Governor John Altgeld is said to have moved into here after he left office. But we're going to stay on Pine Grove. There's just such a lot of good stuff on Pine Grove to talk about. So we'll move a little further north to Pine Grove and Waveland. There's mostly apartments here now, but it goes right over to Lakeshore Drive, and it would have gone right to the lake a few decades back. Well, several decades back by now. But right here on the corner, back in the old days, was a mansion, a very odd-looking brick mansion, owned by a guy named Parker R. Mason. And really, he had property all over the area dotted with little buildings. There was a small wooden place where his family actually lived. And on the inside, this place was primarily a laboratory, like a workshop and a building place. Now, he had been involved in the 1870s in the whiskey ring. This was a big thing of bilking the government out of whiskey taxes. It's the kind of scandal you can probably get your head around if you want to devote a couple of years to it. There was even one point in it when a Tribune reporter came to ask to see what was inside of his vault, and Parker Mason said, "It's been a long time since I killed a man. I'd better have a drink and get ready." And then there was a bit of a rowdy now. Is that the same tree? I don't think so. Can't imagine. I mean, the whole place has been thoroughly re-landscaped over the years. But after his days as a whiskey ring outlaw, by the 1880s he was just known as a local eccentric. There was always rumors about what he was doing inside of this building. There were stories like people hearing strange whirring noises at night and wondering, what's he building in there? What in the hell is he building in there? At one point they saw him bringing wings inside of the place, and the rumor went around that he was building a flying machine. Turned out he was building a windmill. But equally mysterious to people was a large boulder that was on his property. Now, this large boulder was so big that some people wondered how it could possibly have come to be there. Though one reporter said that a team of oxen brought it over from Ashland and Diversey about 25 years before, the rumor was always that it was a meteor that had fallen from the sky and landed in exactly the position it was in now. Now, there's a bit of a mystery here, is that I don't know what became of the boulder. He made a really big deal about his death. He knew that he was dying, he had gotten really sick, and started holding rehearsals for his funeral. He would bring in a band and a chorus and have them practice the hymns. He had a friend who was an ordained minister practice the eulogy and let him give notes about what sermon he would give, and stipulated that he would be buried in Rose Hill Cemetery and that this boulder would be his gravestone. Now, there was even a thing in the paper saying that Rose Hill had approved it. But the boulder is not there. He's buried under just a simple marker that's flush to the ground. No sign of the boulder anywhere nearby. But it's also not still present here anywhere that I could find. It would be the kind of boulder that would be awfully hard to get rid of, too. But there's a lot of courtyard buildings and stuff in here and a lot of hidden yards, so maybe it's still there someplace. It's one of those things that I still hope to find a little bit more about now and then. Whenever new papers get digitized, it's one of those things where in microfilm I'd have to get really lucky to stumble across new information on it. But when new papers get digitized, one of the first things I look up is Parker R. Mason's boulder. But we'll actually just go a few more blocks up Pine Grove. There's a lot of good stuff on Pine Grove. We just covered this place on the morning mini tour the other day. This is a place at 3912 Pine Grove, a little bit further up, where in 1935, January of 1935, the FBI launched a raid. A few months before, they had killed Babyface Nelson. Well, 6 months before, they had killed John Dillinger, who was public enemy number 1. After his death, Babyface Nelson became public enemy number 1. And after his death, a guy named Fred Karpus became public enemy number 1, who was a member of the Barker-Karpus gang. This is Doc Barker of that gang, generally known today as the Ma Barker gang. Because after the FBI raided Fred Barker and killed both him and his mother, they spread a story that Ma had really been the brains of the whole operation. She probably wasn't. There's really no evidence that she was that involved in the gang, except for the fact that she was shot in the big final shootout. But before this, when Karpus was on the run, the police had traced Doc Barker to living in this apartment on Pine Grove, along with several other members of his gang. So they ended up organizing a stakeout. One day when this guy, Doc Barker, came out, they surrounded him. He turned around and tried to run, then slipped on some sludge, fell on his face, and was promptly arrested. He was quoted as saying, "Of all the days to come out without a gun." As though they wouldn't have just shot him to bits. But in fact, they did do that to another guy, a guy named Russell Gibson, who was also present, was thoroughly shot to death. But they then busted into the place and took everybody else alive, including a guy by the name of Brian Bolton. sometimes known as Byron Bolton, though his real name was William Bryan Bolton. Now, the cops had been looking for him for quite some time, actually for a couple of years, and shortly after his arrest, it was announced in the Chicago Evening Herald Examiner, or the Herald Examiner announced that in addition to his crimes with the Barker Karpus gang, Byron Bolton had also confessed to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. The cops had been looking for him in connection with this for a long time. When they raided the apartment that the lookouts had used, they found a letter with his name on it, so they suspected he must have had something to do with it. He'd been on the run ever since, and the paper then didn't have any real information on this. They just decided that he must have confessed to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and rather than getting the word straight from the FBI, they just published what he'd apparently been telling his friends. They didn't specify who these friends were, but he said that it had been a group that has come to be known now as the American Boys. It was a group of gangsters out of St. Louis, guys like Fred Gates, Fred Killer Burke. He said at the time, the rumor at the time was that he had confessed to being one of the lookouts. Really, from internal FBI documents, we can see that he hadn't really said anything yet, so far as anybody knows. But after a couple of months, J. Edgar Hoover sat him down and asked him about the massacre, and he did, in fact, give a little confession that was pretty much what the papers had said. He only said that he rented the apartment, not that he had actually been one of the lookouts himself. But it was a group that we've now come to know as the American Boys. Just about every article about them says that Capone called them the American Boys because they weren't Italian, they weren't Irish. I kind of dispute that. I've never actually found an article where Capone says that himself. In fact, he probably would have referred himself that way. He was specifically told Sissy Patterson, "I know Italian. I was born in New York City 31 years ago." To which she replied, 31? You're only 31? Because he looked about 61 by then. But one of their wives, one of the groups of their wives eventually wrote a big confession, pretty much backing up everything that Bolton had told the FBI. And she kind of casually referred to them as the American Boys herself. But of course, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre itself has come up on so many of the tours that I won't dwell on it too much, but that was also in Lakeview, down at 2122 North Clark Street, near the Clark Bar, in the SMC Cartage Company, a little garage that was right here, where the parking space is now. 7 members of the Moran gang were lined up against the wall by guys dressed up like cops. According to Bolton, it was Fred Killer Burke, and Fred Shotgun Gates. They walked in dressed as cops, then a few other people burst in through the back and shot everybody down. Presumably it was a raid to get Bugs Moran, but Moran himself was not present, but these guys, having been brought in from out of town, probably made the mistake. They would have seen these guys, with their collars pulled up and their hats pulled down low. Then they probably asked something like, "All right, which one of you mugs is Bugs Moran?" Since none of them said anything, they just shot all 7 of them. Now also, this same location here, down this block, in the 1950s, was the site of a couple of Chicago's earliest gay bars. There was one called the Scarlet Ribbon, which was for gay men, and one called Volleyballs, which was for lesbians. David Lee Hull, a doctor who frequented the Scarlet Ribbon, said the Scarlet Ribbon was always guys dancing their heads off, then Volleyballs would be 6 women getting into a fight. So now we're into the part that we more commonly call Lincoln Park, a little further south, and in fact we'll move over into Lincoln Park proper from here, past the supposed burial site of David Kennison, who claims to be the last veteran of the Boston Tea Party. But we've covered him many times, lying through his teeth. And what we're getting to here, well, there also is some gang history here. A gangster named Nails Morton was killed while riding a horse around here. And right after the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, a police chief was quoted in the papers as telling a couple of kids around the station, "This is what comes of being a gangster. Remember Nails Morton? He just got so much money as a gangster that he didn't know what to do with it, so he started messing around with horses and ended up getting killed." A gangster named Two Gun Altery is said to have gone and killed the horse in revenge. He'll come up on a later tour. But right here, we are right in the heart of the Old City Cemetery. So between the early 1840s and on through 1960, this was the main burial ground of the city. Then Graceland and Rose Hill were started. There was a few years of overlap where people were still being buried here, and then they were moved over between Graceland and Rose Hill up to about 1874 or 1875. So right in the middle of it was the offices of a guy named Edward Burkhardt, who was a gravestone carver. He was especially known for his work doing angels, but he had a place right here where we would do stuff for City Cemetery. I wish I could find anything that I could definitively say was his work, but there are some examples, like this one that is now at Graceland Cemetery, but is from 1849 and would have originally been at the old City Cemetery. That could have been the work of Edwin Burkhardt. And Burkhardt, for the record, is buried at Rose Hill himself, though I'm not sure exactly where in Rose Hill. He's one of those people on my list. But the important thing is he was operating a gravestone carving shop and a marble carving shop right about here. Now, meanwhile, back in Iowa, there was a guy by the name of George Hull. George Hull was an atheist who got into a fight with a couple of people about a verse in Genesis that says there were giants in those days, which is a weird translation of a different word. But the actual, how we should actually be translating Nephilim usually means the fallen ones, but it's unclear what they're really going on about. It's almost always translated as giants. He was talking to somebody who believed that quite literally. Yes, there were giants who used to walk around on the earth. So George Hull had a good idea. He thought, I'm going to play a prank on everybody. So he went to Iowa, to Fort Dodge, Iowa, where he bought himself a massive block of gypsum, then took it to Chicago, took it to Edwin Burkhardt's place and said, I want you to carve me a giant. So right about here, Edward Burkhardt did in fact carve himself a giant. By most accounts, he didn't really know what it was for. He thought it was just for a display someplace. Didn't realize that George Hull was planning to cart it off to his cousin's farm in Cardiff, New York, where he buried it. Then a year later, he hired a couple of people to dig a well right in the spot where he had buried the giant statue. And there it was. You can imagine this was quite a surprise for the well diggers. George wanted to see if people would say, yes, this is proof that Genesis 6:4 is literally true exactly as translated. And some people, in fact, did. Naturally, everybody had to go get a look at the thing. Not only was it a good prank from his point of view, but people started paying good money to see this thing. P.P. Barnum offered $150,000 for it, as you can see here. Now, they didn't give that to him, so P.T. Barnum naturally just made his own copy and exhibited a copy instead. Eventually, after about a year or so, after having made a bunch of money, Hull got nervous and spilled the beans, said the whole thing was just a prank, but by that time he had made tens of thousands of dollars off of the thing. The original was eventually bought by the publisher of the Des Moines Register, who put it on display in his living room. It was like a coffee table / conversation piece. He said that he put some good theatrical lighting around it, surrounded it with posters of its heyday, and also noted that one day he and his friends decided it would be fun to smash the penis part with a hammer. Now, the thing was anatomically correct. Dude totally could have been in Coke magazine. But it was eventually repaired, and it was eventually sold again. It is now in Cooperstown, New York. But there is a replica of it in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Fort Dodge has this frontier town, and this is one of their biggest claims to fame, is they were the place that sold the gypsum that was used for it. So now there is a replica there with a fig leaf over the part that was smashed on the original. I remember going to see this when I was a kid. I think my parents took us through here like on the way to Okoboji one time. But that's what they're covering. Let's do some quick just plain architecture. Just south of Wrigley Field is this really cool street called Alta Vista Terrace. This is essentially a subdivision. Early 20th century, this was all built at once. Designed in such a way that every building, every house, all bunched close together like something out of a Dickens novel. Every house has an exact replica diagonally across from it on the other side of the street. Or at least supposedly. So there are certain ones that you can't really find a replica looking up and down the street. But when you get to the middle section of it, it's just a really cool street to walk down. For like one little block, well, just north of Wrigley Field, just a little south of Graceland Cemetery, Alta Vista Terrace. For just this little block here, it's like you're in this whole other world of townhouses. And right here in the middle, the two in the middle where the sides meet, are exact replicas of each other. Quaint little hidden gem. Became a landmark some years later. It's very often to see signs for like Cubs paraphernalia inside of the windows because we are right close to Wrigley Field from here. But yeah, Cubs paraphernalia like the mailbox sign in the window. But just a few blocks the other direction from Wrigley Field, down Addison Street, we were just here yesterday for the morning mini tour. The little gargoyle chicken smoking a joint right there. A couple people pointed out to me that if it doesn't have drainage, it's not a gargoyle, it's a grotesque. That's the kind of semantics up with which I shall not put. Really cool courtyard building, still has working fountains and everything at 522 West Addison. Which, circa 1925... was the home of a young woman named Clara Hark. Now, Clara Hark had gotten married at 17 and divorced already. At 25, she was married to a guy named Arthur. Her mother, Lily, had recently remarried, too, to a guy who was much younger than her, kind of in between her age and Clara's. But Lily and her new husband got a place up in Fox Lake. Clara and her own husband would leave their place here on Addison Street on weekends to go up to Fox Lake, where they would spend the weekend mostly golfing and visiting with the neighbors, and then coming home on Sunday night for the big Sunday dinner. Occasionally, they would be late for the big Sunday dinner, and Lily, by all accounts, would go into an absolute rage. There were a couple of accounts that she was kind of slowly losing her mind. But one night after, the way that Clara described it is one night after a really nasty fight, she stormed out of the place, then heard the sound of her mother firing 4 shots from a pistol. And she thought, oh no, I hope that's just to scare us. Then came back into the room and found that her mother had shot herself 4 times, including once in the solar plexus and once in the mouth. So the police were called, and the police were immediately awfully suspicious, partly because they saw the body lying there but didn't see a gun anywhere. After some searching, they found one in Lily's bedroom, and the party who were there said, "Oh, well, we're sorry. We made a mistake. We just kind of forgot. When we came in, she wasn't dead yet, so we found the gun next to her, and we quick took it away before she could shoot herself again." They then proceeded to think, how could a person shoot themselves 4 times? And arrested Clara for murder. Now, this was the era of like the stories that inspired the musical Chicago, and it was a very common theme of reporters that they would talk about how pretty women never seemed to get convicted of murder in Chicago. Clara showed up dressed to the nines in her furs and her red dress, flirted outrageously, got a lot of mail in the cell, and the prosecution brought in an expert who said, no, it would not really be possible to shoot yourself in the solar plexus and then still be able to aim and shoot a gun in your mouth. But the defense brought in another witness who said, yes, that would in fact be possible. The jury deliberated, and Clara was acquitted of murder. Now, it seems rather incongruous to me. I don't know if you could really convince me that somebody could actually shoot themselves 4 times. But thereafter, she ended up in the news quite a bit. I mean, the way Genevieve Forbes Herrick's, the Chicago Tribune's ace crime writer, who wrote frequently about how fed up she was with people letting women off the hook, life seems to hold more zest for Clara Hark since she was tried for the murder of her mother and acquitted. Bigger and better publicity might almost appear to her be persistent since she first tasted its flavor during those days in which she shared with her oldest husband and youngest stepfather a 3-quartered and somewhat dubious fame as the defendant in the trial for the killing of Mrs. Lily Holt. In the year or two since, she had been in the news and in jail a lot. Once for getting in a fight with a nightclub owner, once for getting in a fight with a cab driver, once for being caught right here at 522 Addison, beating an old childhood friend with a golf club. We know that she liked golfing. In 1928, about a year after this article, she was mentioned as being one of about a dozen women who were locked up for being drunk. And while in jail for being drunk, she was quoted as banging on the cell saying, "I thought I was in the land of liberty. If you think I'm going to sober up, you've got another think coming. I'm going to move someplace else. I'm going to make so much noise that you've got to let me out of here." And of course, they did let her out of there. But it seems that after that, she left Chicago. For the next decade or so, she made news in similar ways all around Ohio and Michigan. But then about the 1940s, she moved to Palm Beach. And thereafter, by this time she would have been 50, she just kind of lived a quiet life. She came into the news again in the 1970s, once for ranting that a zoning board that was going to tear down a particular building was just doing it because they were racists. And once when a hurricane was coming in, when she said that she refused to leave because she was living there with her 7 cats and she wouldn't leave them. She died in the early 1980s, near the age of 90. But all right, that gets us to a little bit over time right now, in fact. So I think it's time that we plug the other upcoming events. Next in-person tour is Saturday morning. That is going to be at Graceland Cemetery. Tickets are on sale now at MysteriousChicago.com. Next Saturday, we are at Rose Hill Cemetery. We're slowly bringing these things on back. Virtual tours coming up. First of all, Sunday, we've got the virtual architectural boat tour Sunday morning. And Tuesday night, we'll also be doing an Effing Chicago edition of the virtual ghost tour. That means it's like a ghost tour, only I'm going to do a lot more swearing. So, lots of good stuff coming up. If I've got time, I'm going to determine in the next couple of days whether I've got time to do a virtual tour of Uptown, another new one next week. So we'll figure that out as we go. But always lots of cool stuff coming up here. Now, should you need a Mysterious Chicago sweatshirt, t-shirt, hoodie, I got one of the new models right here. With all these awesome headlines, John Dillinger's brain now resting in pieces, You Can All Go Thirsties, Capone's Goodbye, O'Banion Gang Like Pirates of Old Days, my personal favorite, Smut! That's all at cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago, including the new one for Mystericon. Thrills, chills, dead guys. Yes, if you go to the Mysterious Chicago Regulars Facebook group, they're talking about the convention that they're going to be holding here October 1st through 3rd at the Palmer. They've got a block of rooms at the Palmer House. It's a group rate. It's an incredible rate for Palmer House rooms. Tickets still available. We'll be announcing the lineup of events that I'll be hosting along with Mandy Crypt and Layla Royale from Effing Chicago. I will be announcing that hopefully in just the next couple of days here. So lots of great stuff available, not just for the convention, but at cafepress.com/MysteriousChicago. So, all right, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I'm going to put Earl Father Hines back on, and we will hang out some more. Thanks, everybody. Let's move to something with a little more pep. There we go. Dave, far as I know, Whiskey and a Cookie is still on for 6:30. Although Patty has now got a new radio show from 5 to 6 on a WCPT 820 AM Progressive Talk Radio is going to be the Patty Vasquez Show. And thanks to my dad for the new t-shirt. I don't have much of my own merch. Oh, thanks, Jordana. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Aaron. Nice to know I still got some good ones in me. Now, Chris, I got the Kennison thing on too. There's even like that little note in there saying, "Don't listen to a word this guy says," and then lists off like his different ages and different records. Thanks, Illidor. I will say that of the walking tours that I'll be doing that weekend, most of them will be in the $20 range. That Saturday night, October 2nd, I should be doing tours for the Lincoln Park Zoo. I don't control the ticketing for those ones. The boat tour, I think, will be $36, which is well lower than the next leading brand. Thanks, Deanna and Marita Jeanette. Thanks, Joe and Diane. Hey, Megan. Thanks, Kathy. I'm going to keep checking my Twitter to make sure Vanna hasn't weighed in to solve the puzzle. Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Luann. David, they have enough life preservers for everybody. This is U.S. Coast Guard inspected vehicle. In the extremely unlikely event of an emergency, look for a uniformed crewman to tell you what to do. Don't look at me, I got no idea. Club Z Tutoring says, I'm a native of Fort Dodge, and yes, the Gypsum Man is still a big deal. I was surprised. I remember seeing it years and years ago as a kid. Thanks, Lee. No one on YouTube. I've talked about the 1919 Black Sox occasionally. I've never done a whole big one on it. I've written about it some. I think it's in Jerks from Chicago History has a thing on it. And I've seen the movie 8 Men Out, which is pretty good, except when they show the little kid at the beginning, you just know that they wrote the kid in so he can say it ain't so, Joe, later. Oh, you know Pullman's not going to provide us with beer. Well, we don't work for him, so. Thanks, Christy. Hey, Ellen. It'll be up. You know how it goes. It'll be up like 10 minutes after we finish the post-tour hang. Hi, Ellen. Where did Miles go now? Ronnie is putting stuff together in her office, so he's probably investigating that. Joe, no, I never worked for the Untouchables bus. They tried to poach me once or twice, or they tried to, like, talk to me, you should come work for us, you know. And then I'd, like, see them, like, posing with kids and guns afterwards. I don't want to do that much. Jordana, I wonder, I don't think that's probably the same one as where where Golden Dagger is now. But I'll find Miles in a minute. Thanks, Christine. Yes, the desk fit in my car. It's an IKEA desk, so they do have a, it's a pretty easy, the box is as compact as it can be. Kendra, the in-person boat tour, I'm waiting on getting all the contracts in with the boat until I put up ticket stuff, but it'll be October 1st. And the Mysterious Chicago Regulars group will be up first. Robert, thanks. And the comment that I get, it writes out what the GIF was. Character holding their head in their hand saying, "You're number one."
But here's rhythm and jive, Earl Father Hines and the St. Louis Blues.
Oh yeah, it'll be on Summer of George. Well, the IKEA assembly, the desk is it's just a flat board, really. And she props it up on 2 sets of drawers. Now, the drawer assembly was something else. Oh, welcome back, Dana. Have a good night, Betsy. Heather, indoors we are. Outside, in a group like the bus where we're all kind of pushed together, I might recommend it, but we'll see where we are in October. I hope we're good by then. In September, there's a night at Summerfest in Milwaukee where at 7:30 it's Miley Cyrus, at 10 o'clock it's Bleachers. I would love to see that lineup. Love to, but as of right now, I'm not sure it's a good idea. Jordana, yeah, the Sabians. They come up quite a bit. I looked them up a little at the time. When I was in Weird Chicago, we used to take people to the tonic room all the time. They would usually trot out the dagger. But I guess they now have the dagger framed. So if you want to see it, it's right in there. $32.21 Sheffield. So Belmont and Sheffield. Trying to picture the exact building in my head. Good night, Bob. Yeah, Mary, it's been quite a number of movies, and you can see why. Now, if it's streaming, I'm sure I'll be able to get a video of Miley's set anyway. She's been putting on some of the best rock shows in the business lately. Yeah, Lala, I don't know if there's an act I want to see enough that I would go to Lala for at this point in my career. Maybe if it was in October, I'd be okay with it, like Riot Fest when it's not quite as hot out. That I can deal with. Mysterious Chicago Hawaiian shirt. I'm not sure how I could arrange that.
From Chicago, this is the National Broadcasting Company.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to see Journey unless they get Steve Perry back. I mean, at least with the Beach Boys, the one Beach Boy does a lot of the singing. Thanks, Eleanor. Gotta rewind the Earl. Casey, Woodstock 99 was a special thing. I remember when I was a kid, my friends and I would puzzle a lot over this Nostradamus quatrain that says in 1999, in 7 months, a king of terror will come. And I think we figured it out now. 1999 in 7 months was Woodstock 99, the king of terror was Kid Rock. I'd been brushing off Nostradamus for a long time, but he was right there. When I was in 7th grade, we had to do video biographies of people. I did mine on George Lucas. My friend did Nostradamus.
Give our faithful seat a slap and carry on in jive. Hi-ho, Silver!
Now, I remember watching that video about Nostradamus that Orson Welles narrated. And now you can go on YouTube and see him saying, I just took the gig. I think this was all gobbledygook. Or I think this was all gobbledygook. I can't do that one. Am I going to sing at the con? Good question. I don't know. Maybe Saturday afternoon. Saturday afternoon in the meeting room or something. Well, of course I'm going to say... Well, if it's been decided. Oh, Jacqueline, those are my favorite. The French champagne has always been celebrated for its excellence. We showed those outtakes on, I think it was the Drink Like the Dickens Time Travel Pub Crawl. One of them was made with Parmesan brandy. David, the one with the grills is Oakwoods. Carol, I haven't seen a bit of the Olympics. Well, look, Miley is similar to Taylor Swift. If you made up your mind about her when she was 18, she's 30 now. Miley's doing some of the best hard rock performances going. Plus, there was her Pride Month thing that was basically a queer reimagining of the Grand Ole Opry on the Peacock. That was brilliant. Yeah, all of Miley's version of Jolene is great. Her whole Backyard series from a few years back, where she's just singing old folk songs and country songs and replacement songs, was magnificent. Now, Taylor is not really rocking out, but her last two albums that were really stripped back and acoustic and piano-based were the albums of the year last year. In fact, I got one on my turntable right now. Oh, I just got an Instagram alert. Somebody has already got the Mystericon shirt. Waiting for it to load from Frosty Catfish. Oh yeah, here we go. It's still a little hot in here for me. It was pretty hot today, 80s. But the forecast I saw said it's gonna be it's starting to cool off and no further heat wave is foreseen. Temperatures in the 70s and overcast coming. Like, man, usually you gotta pay a lot and be really specific about what you want with a custom video to get talk that satisfying. Oh, you just heard Miles meowing. Miles is like, hey, it's my turn, right? Ah, yeah, Miles. There you go, buddy. You didn't think I wasn't going to put you on, did you? Of course I am. Phoenix, yes. I got mine blasting. I'm still sweating standing here. Megan, I wish I could find a way to get Miles out there, but I don't think he'd be too keen on heading out there himself. Miles? What are you meowing about? Do you want to go play with your cat dancer? We have to clear over to there. Alright, I think Miles is ready to do some jumping. He wants some of the attention right now, so I'm going to do a quick plug for the upcoming stuff again. Saturday, Graceland Cemetery in person, and the Saturday after that will be Rose Hill. Might even do an evening one that night too, on August 7th. So lots of stuff coming up here. Be back here on Sunday morning for the virtual architectural boat tour. So all kinds of great stuff coming up here at Mysterious Chicago. Now tomorrow morning, I'm not totally sure I'll be able to do Find a Grave Friday because I've got to wait for... there's a new dryer being delivered to the building. I promised the landlord I'd be home. So we'll see. I'll figure something out. If not, we'll do Find a Grave on Saturday. But always a lot of stuff, good stuff coming around here. So thanks a lot for joining me, everybody. Thanks a lot for your support. I'm Adam Seltzer for Mysterious Chicago Tour saying stay safe, stay strong, and of course, if you can, stay spooky.